Hello, Anna. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello.
Now, let's kick it off. Who are you? Where are you from? And where are you based now?
So I'm Anna. I live in Singapore. I grew up mostly in England. A little bit of my childhood was spent in Kuwait, and then we were back in England. And then I moved to Vietnam when I was 24, footloose and fancy free. And then I met my husband. We've moved on to Thailand. We've moved here, and now we live in Singapore.
Fabulous. Can we go right back?
Oh,
Kuwait.
right.
That's a bit random.
Yeah, so my dad was a fighter pilot instructor. So he was posted out there for about 3.5 years or so. So we moved out when I was a child. I don't really remember it. There's photos, obviously. My brother was a bit older, but yeah, there's kind of parallels because my mum moved with a 9-month-old and a 3-year-old, and I did the same when I moved to Thailand, and I found it difficult and she found it difficult. So it was always good to have like a parent that could sympathise with your challenges.
Oh, maybe we should have done a double call. That could be a first that I could have interviewed a mother and daughter at the same time.
Yeah, mum lives in Vietnam, so we are still a bit weird, and my brother lives there too. So we are a little bit of a strange expat family.
Strange, interesting, not strange.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a different word. Interesting, unique.
Unique. So, okay, well, touching on that, when you compare notes with your mum and her experience, I'm making assumptions. I'm thinking this time was maybe early 80s that she might have been in the Middle East.
Yeah,
Was that something that they did regularly, which was pick up and move, or was this just a random sort of one-off thing?
yeah. In the Air Force, you move a lot, right? So my dad was in the Air Force, so every 5 months and 28 days, my mum moved. Because if you stayed for 6 months, the Air Force paid for your accommodation. So they would move you every 5 months and 28 days. So you had to pay for it yourself. So my parents moved a lot, and they were married for a while before they had kids. And then they moved a little bit around when we were children. We went to Kuwait, and then we came back and did one final bit. And then my dad was like, I don't want to fly a desk. So because in the Air Force, you have to just progress into like a desk job. And so he left and joined British Airways. So then we settled ish in one place, moved to another place. And I grew up most of my life from about 7 in one very small town in like Middle Earth, England.
But it was close enough to an airport for Dad to get out of there.
Hour and 45, 2 hours down to Heathrow or to Gatwick. So it's like 100 miles north of London. It's a very beautiful town and a lovely place to grow up. And I feel very privileged that I've grown up there because it was small and protected, and I had a smaller school and smaller childhood. But obviously, we travelled a lot as children, so we got free tickets because you can travel when you are an airline staff. So we travelled a lot. We would have like 5 to 7 holidays a year because, of course, the flights were free and the accommodation was there at the other end. So we kind of maximised that. So we did a lot of travelling when I was a kid. So that kind of gave me the breadth, but with the home safety, if that makes sense.
Yeah. My brain has I'm sorry, I am listening to what you're saying, but I'm kind of like a record stuck on your mother moving every 5 months and 28 days. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And it's not like just moving house, it's like moving town.
Oh, yeah. Although, to be fair, because of the planes that he flew, because he flew Harriers, they were all in sort of one area, that like Lincolnshire area, that like bulge, if you like, on the bit of England. So they were kind of in that area. So she was a teacher by training, but obviously you can't stay in school and then keep moving. So she retrained as like an estate agent, because then you could pick up and move on, because it was a skill set that was easier to go in and try and sell a house and what have you. And then when we got a bit older, she became a florist. So she had different skills. Then she became a librarian. So and then she went back to teaching when she went to Vietnam. So yeah.
Okay, I feel like you're going totally encroaching on her interview. So let's not go into too much detail. Wow, though, that is a lot. Okay, right. Back to the task at hand. You, Anna. So tell me, what were you doing as a footloose, fancy free 24-year-old?
Well, I'll keep it clean. No, I was having a good time, right? Like Saigon in like, when did I arrive? 2008. It was just such a great place and some really amazing people. I had the best group of friends and, you know, we'd go out all the time. I worked in events and marketing. So I worked for Auscham, the Australian Chamber of Commerce, because I'm not an Aussie, but they couldn't find one to do the job. And I think I got asked that at every single event. So I had that answer prepared. And then I went into high-end corporate travel. So basically the minute, like incentive groups, when you reward someone from the minute they land to the minute they leave, I planned everything and all the marketing and everything behind that. So I worked hard and we played hard, basically. We just had a really fun time. Really big group of very diverse people. Yeah, and then I met my husband. He lived in Singapore and I lived in Saigon. And so we met through mutual friends, and then we did 2.5 years between Saigon and Singapore before I imported him into Vietnam, because I didn't want to live in Singapore, because my job was fun in Vietnam, but it wouldn't have been fun in Singapore. So we all moved on in, and we were there for 6 years together in Vietnam. We got married and had 2 kids, and then we decided that we wanted something a bit different. So we thought we'd come back to Singapore. It didn't quite work out. So we ended up in Bangkok for a year. No, it wasn't a year. It was 11 months, 3 weeks and 3 days. And I think I counted everyone before I could get out. And then we got to Singapore.
So you didn't enjoy Thailand?
Yeah, it wasn't for us. And, you know, I've had time to reflect upon it now, 4.5 years away from that. We would have people who arrived in Saigon and they absolutely hands down hated it. Everything about it, everything from the food, the people, the place, they hated it. And we'd be like, what's there to hate? Like, it's great. And we arrived in Thailand and I was like, oh my God, I can't be here. Nothing came together. His job didn't come together. Where we lived didn't come together. The people that we kept meeting, you know, when nothing is working, that was it for us. So I was like, wow, all those people that arrive, because you never know like where someone's come from, what their expectations are, like what they wanted, and it just didn't match our expectations at all. It just didn't work. And so the good thing is that we were like united in this isn't working, and we're a pretty good team. So we just got through each day. And of course our youngest was super sick. Like, he had pneumonia like 5 times. He had raging eczema. We had so many issues. So we just kind of got through it, and then we left. And came here, Singapore.
Interesting. I think that's an interesting concept that I know people that I've interviewed to date have sometimes like indicated that it might have been a bit of a challenge in certain places. You're the first that has blatantly hated a place quite outwardly.
Yeah. I could tell you the 3 things I liked about it, and that would be it. Like, I liked the fact that there was a really great reuse, reduce, recycle place around the corner, and it was like a bulk store, and they did the best almond butter and peanut butter, so I could actually bake for the kids, and that set my world on fire. I had a hairdresser, and I absolutely loved her. She had my very dark British sense of humor. We're still friends on Instagram. Like, she was wonderful. And then there was a vegan place called Broccoli Revolution, and they did the best vegetable broccoli balls I've ever eaten. So they were the 3 things that I loved. And like, we got married in Thailand. We eloped to Thailand and got married there. We had the best weekend. But just living there and the situation we were in, 2 really young children, it just didn't work for us, right? And I think you get to places and it doesn't match your expectation. And so what do? Do you try? And of course, all of my family have lived abroad. So my dad was living in Dubai, and he's like, you know, you've got to give it time. It's not going to be 2 months. You know, it's different. When you move to Vietnam, you're 24, you could go out and meet everybody. It's different now. My mum was the same. She's like, you know, it was hard in Kuwait when we got there. And it just never got any easier. And you're like, we're 6 months in, and everybody where we were and where we lived didn't enjoy it either. So we didn't even have the joy. You couldn't find joy with the people that you were connecting with. So I feel it was just one of those situations. It's just one of those things where it's just like, this isn't working. We got to cut and run. And so, yeah, it's a money pit financially. We were like, oh, let's just ship ourselves again. So we did, and that's as it is, right? And luckily we got here like 6 months before COVID. So we were in. And then literally everyone was like, oh, this is so awful. I can't believe we're being locked in. We were like, we get to go to a park. There's like green spaces. And we live right next door to a massive park. And so for us, we were like, oh, we would have been in Bangkok. Oh, we would have been in Bangkok. So for us, COVID was more of a relief that we're here, not there. So yeah, that's how we survived.
How interesting. And had your husband's job been one that you'd had in Vietnam and moved over to Thailand for, or was it a new role?
New. He's a teacher. So yeah, we chose to take a risk. And again, it all looked good on paper, but then when you get there, it just didn't work for us, right? Works for lots of people that were there, and you're always going to get into a job or a school or a place where it's just not working, and it just nothing came together. It was a 7-kilometer round trip to the nearest 7-Eleven where we lived, and I had a child that couldn't sit in a car seat because he just screamed. Okay, and of course you could get in a car, 25-minute journey, or it could be 3.5 hours, and you didn't know, and it could just be because it's Tuesday and that's why the traffic was bad. So it was like, for me, it was just so anxiety. The car was like the anxiety box. I was like, oh my God, are we going to die in this car? I would have like this huge activity pack, snacks, enough to keep everybody going in case you just hit a traffic jam and you just didn't move. I couldn't, yeah.
That's so funny. That's so funny, like talking about that sort of distance to an Australian where I'm like, 7 kilometres.
Nothing, but that 7 kilometres could take you, like it took me an hour and 45 the first time I went to the supermarket, and it was 8 kilometres from my house because the traffic just didn't move. And that was on the outskirts of Bangkok. That wasn't even in the city. That was in some like what place, right? So yeah, it was a lot for us. But you got through it. We learned a lot. Like we called it the lost year for a long time. But then I was like, oh, it's not fair, because it was such a like pivotal time for our children. Like 3 and 1, they were rising 4, rising 1. Like big things were happening in their life, right? And we're like, oh, we just want to erase it. I'm like, we can't erase it. We just have to say we've learned from it. And what did we learn from it? And I think we've come out definitely stronger from that, with the resilience to know what you do if you move again.
So what would be your 3 biggest takeaways? We know your 3 things that you liked about Bangkok, but what would be your 3 biggest learnings? Can you reel them off as quickly?
Give it time, because sometimes you do get to a place and it just doesn't quite come together, because it's never going to be what you left. You're never going to have that close-knit friendship that, is just there. You're never going to really know the routine and what you're doing. So you do need to give it time. I think 3, 6, even 12 months sometimes. I mean, it's taken me a while to settle here, but you've just got to give it time. You have to get out there. As much as the introvert in me wants to sit in my pajamas at home, you have to go out and meet a bunch of people so that you can say, you're my cup of tea, or I'm not so sure. So if you only go out and meet one person in a week, that's only one person. I think you've got to find 1 or 2 good people who get you, understand you, want to help you, want to be there for you. And then they open the door into different areas. So I think as much as I want to be at home and just alone and read a book, you have to go out, you have to network, you have to go to these mum and baby groups, you have to go to these, wives only groups or whatever it is, to see if you can try and find someone that is, going to vibe with you. Basically, that's only 2. I've only got 2.
So how did your husband find network? Because I know that advice is quite female heavy, and it's often quite a handy thing to be able to lean into, because there's the mum scene and things. How did he sort of, even though he was the working one and he had work colleagues and things, like what sorts of things was he doing to sort of get out there and build that network?
Yeah, in Bangkok, nothing, because I think we just decided that he tried a few evenings out, he tried but there wasn't enough people there to make like a sports team or anything. And I think it's a big failing, because predominantly the the one that is the worker, the one that the package that you move with is often the man. And they go to work and they hit the ground running, and like they might make some work buddies and go out for some drinks. But that's it. There doesn't seem to be any kind of support. There is no kind of understanding, like you say, that, well, you know, like mum and baby group isn't for everybody, but at least you have an option. At least you can say, right, oh, let's do a class party, or let's have a play in the park, or whatever it is. As a mum, you can try and do that. But as the worker, you've got to earn. You're starting a new job. It's all encompassing. You have to be in early and leave late. You know, you have to be getting into it. So I think that is a gap in the market, if you like, for people to have some kind of network. And that's not business networking, because that's the other thing. Lots of partners move based on the fact that they're going to have networking events to go to like move their business along. So they're going into a role that's going to allow them to, oh, I'm going to a networking event, or I'm joined a chamber or whatever, because you want to move your job along. But that's not the case for a teacher. Like, you go and you teach. So he has got a network there, and some friends. And obviously he lived here before, so he has friends from before. So that worked quite well, that he's been able to pick up with them.
So you battled it through. What did you call it? What was the year? What did you refer to the year as?
Lost year.
The lost year. I was going to say the dead year. I was like, that's a bit grim. You didn't call it that.
You know, and there are pros and cons, right? We got through it. So that's the positive.
Yeah. So when you relocated to Singapore, what were the things that you put in place before you went so that you didn't sort of do things differently? Like, I know you had some sort of bits of advice there, but like, what were the things that you guys actively and practically put into place? Like, was it around physical location where you lived, or more due diligence on the job, or was there a job to go to? Like, what did that sort of look like in prep?
We had 5 weeks. But that was better, because I was like, I'm done, sell it. And we sort of left. That was it. We just sold and left and told nobody. We didn't really have a choice where to live. That was all sorted. So I still live on the fringe, if you will. Like, I'm out as far as you can get. I pretty much paddle across from Palauban. So we don't live in central locations. So that was a bit of a challenge. But we realised that we had, and this is what I'm about to say is a hugely privileged statement, but we had no help and no support in Bangkok. Like, we couldn't really find. Eventually, in like February, after we moved there in the August, we found someone to come and help do a bit of cleaning and a bit of childcare. And so that was a priority for us. Like, we wanted someone to help us, because we didn't have a date night, we didn't have any time to ourselves, we didn't get to do exercise. So we were like, the only thing that's going to make us as a couple and as people happy is to have a support network. And that for us was help, basically. So we have a full-time live-in helper. And I talk to my clients in Australia, in the UK, in the US, and it's like, it's unfathomable. My aunt can't get her head around it, right? But it's the situation that we are lucky to be in. And that made our lives infinitely better, because there was somebody else just to help do something, so that we could walk down to the beach and have a drink, or you can go out on an evening. So then when you meet someone, or my husband was like, oh, so-and-so is having a drinks thing this evening from work, his wife is coming and there's a few friends. It's like, yes, I can go to that. So that kind of opened it up for us to be able to like meet people, make some more friends, and enjoy life a bit more, because I think there was no joy in Bangkok. Like, the joy was gone, so we needed to find that joy here. And so that's kind of what we worked on, like being able to have time on our own, away from all the people that I'd created and had chosen to live with, but also be able to do things together as a couple again.
So were you working in Bangkok?
No. So I started to trail after my second child, because we knew at that point we were going to leave. So I didn't go back. So I left my corporate role after my first child, like he was about a year and a bit. And then I went freelance and did marketing there, similar to what I do now, but not quite as sophisticated. It was more just like, I'll just do a bit. And then I had a second child and I chose to leave that job. And he, at that point, the guy that ran the company that I worked with, wanted to make that role bigger, which would have been perfect. But we knew we were leaving and I didn't think it was fair to come back. And then, so I was like, you know what, I'll just leave and hand over. So I didn't work for the last 7 months when we lived in Vietnam. And then we moved to Bangkok and I had no job. And of course, that was a huge difference for me because I'd always had my own friends and my own network and my own financial contribution, and then I didn't. And then we came here and I was like, I'll get everybody settled and then I'll go back into like high-end corporate travel. And then my dad got sick, so I had to travel backwards and forwards to England a few times. And then COVID came and I was like, oh, I'm ready to go back into high-end corporate travel, and like the whole world is grounded. And so I was like, oh, I'll go back into like my backup of events and marketing. And I was like, oh, there's no events. So I was left then here with like, well, what shall I do? And then of course, Singapore like ring fence certain industries for Singaporeans who were coming back, which I get. You know, you got to like look up for your own, but that was also marketing. So I was like, I have 3 things I can go into and I can't do any of them here. And of course, if you take a career break, Singapore and certain other countries are not set up for that. They're not interested in the fact that, you know, you took, 5 years to raise your kids because you need to be at this age, you need to be this standard and you're C-suite. And I'm not that, and I don't want to be that. And so there's no role for me here. So that's kind of when I started my own thing, because I was like, well, I don't know what else to do. So I'll just do something on my own, which worked. And we're here. So
yeah, talk me through what that sort of, how long did that whole process take, that whole sort of, okay, making decision to say, okay, I'm going to start looking for jobs. Obviously the world closing down and your industry is not being particularly conducive to life and work.
right.
That process, like how long was that? And from then until like, okay, like I've got to do something of my own.
So my best friend came to Singapore for a weekend, was going to go to Laos and come back again. And then the world shut down. And then he decided to just stay with us for 8 weeks because, why be in London when you could be here? And he is the creative director of an events company in London. And so he was the one that was like, well, we work with someone. They kind of do like a bit of social media and our marketing, and they're kind of freelance. And I was like, oh, well, that's a nice idea. So I kind of connected with that person. And, someone else telling you that you can do it is what got me there. And so it was probably about early 2001 when I was like, yeah, this isn't getting any better. Like COVID is here for the long run, and the things that are in place are here for the long run. And also I think Singapore changed in the fact that it was like, we don't really want foreigners, we want our own. So those jobs that would have come available never came back out. So yeah, so early 2001, I was like, I met with a friend who randomly I knew from Vietnam. And she'd moved here and married a Singaporean and had kids. And she saw a post on Facebook. Was like, "Are you in Singapore?" I was like, "Yeah." So I connected with her, and she had a friend that ran a business, and so we had lunch. So it was like a network effect of people that I'd known who were like, "Yeah, you've totally got the skill set. Like, definitely, people definitely need it." And so I stepped into that, and yeah, just sort of started something literally with no plan. Just let's see what happens. And then I got a bit more targeted because I was like, this is working, but it's a lot of work and it's not going the direction I want. So I decided to niche down. And so I focus now like on marketing, but email marketing, content strategy. And I like for service-based businesses. So once I decided that that's where I could make the biggest transformation for people, I then rebranded, and then I opened my company here a year ago, actually, almost to the day. So I had a company. I worked with other clients outside of Singapore because setting up here, as you know, is quite hard. Like it's a bit risk. You've got to hire someone. So I wanted to make sure that it was a viable option. So I kind of worked with clients elsewhere before I set up here, because I didn't know if it's going to work. And it turns out it's, I've hit the ground running and fully booked, and I've got big programs coming next year. So it's been good. It's just you have to kind of believe in yourself, right?
I think that network thing is just like the gold nugget for me to take out of this, and very much the reason why I wanted to like start the Trailing Spouse Code, because that like isolation, particularly when you arrive somewhere, but actually I shouldn't even say that, because like a lot of people that have engaged with us have actually been wherever they are for a considerably long time, and you know, life or situation might have changed, or they've come out of the fog of, you know, small kids or things like that, and they're like, I actually, you know, I want to engage in human adult conversation and things. But if you don't, you know, have that random post that gets seen by someone who happens to be here, or there's a friend of a friend or things like that, doesn't happen to everyone. I know I'm very aware that I have a skill that my mum has said that I've had even since I was like a little kid in the playground, that I would like make friends and then remember them the next week, and like, yeah, I remember you, and you're that one's parents and things. But that ability for people to connect in, and it to move beyond the, oh, what class are your kids in, or oh, where
Yeah.
are you from, and then it's sort of just being like, oh, hey, awkward time next time you see them. Like that's something that you actually have to actively push, and I think you touched on that earlier, is that like really putting yourself out there. And I know that that's what a lot of advice that people that I interview give to people, but it's tough. Like it's really tough if that doesn't come naturally to you.
No, and there is a thing like you've got to walk into a room at some point where you know nobody, and they might all know each other. And you know, is it gonna be a nice group where they're gonna be like, oh hi, welcome, come, this is so, and then they're gonna open up to you, or they're gonna be like, oh hi. And I've walked into those rooms and I'm like, whoa, I don't know where to go from here. Like I've interrupted like a private conversation, and you just stand there like, and now I just say, oh, I'm just going to pop to the toilet. So if I'm at a networking event and I pop to the toilet, it's because I feel awkward. And everyone's like, go to the toilet an awful lot. I'm like, it's an easy get out, right? Because no one can question, oh, do you really need the toilet? But you have to hope. And I have had people along the way, along the journey, who have made an effort that's not going to benefit them in any way. I've had a mum who's opened a door with a baby on her, a toddler, and another kid because my kid wouldn't go inside. People who have gone out of their way to stop and say, this person's struggling. And I've had people that I've met here, and I'm like, you need to do this. Like, why haven't you done this? Or I had this idea. I'm like, well, this is how I started my business, and this is how my friend started her business, and this is what you can do. Here are lots of resources. Get yourself going, see where your gaps in your knowledge are, and then come back to me. And they're like, oh, that's very generous. I'm like, yeah, but no one's going to tell you what to do. You have to find people who are going to help like guide you. And in fact, my mum, what you said about making friends, I remember everybody. And my dad was very much the same. He found it so difficult in Kuwait that he started like a document about how to get started, what you needed to know. My mum did it from the woman's point of view. So when new people arrived, like this was your Bible of like, this shit's hard. So here are some things that make it easier. And I did that even in Bangkok. I was like, oh my God, nobody even told me where the supermarket was. No one, I was like, where were you having your legs waxed? I'm like, everyone's doing it, but no one's talking about it. Like everyone had these amazing nails. And I was like, where are you getting your nails done? And no one was sharing this information. And I was like, why? Why don't we have like a central database? And so I set about making one. I mean, I abandoned it because I was like, I gotta get out of here. But I have it now. Like I had it in Vietnam. Like if you arrive somewhere, these are some things that are great. These are some restaurants that are nice. These are places that have got high chairs if you've got a child, right? And I know there are websites out there now that do that, but through my like journey, there haven't been. So I'm always about trying to share that knowledge, because one day someone will say in a room that you're not standing in, oh my God, Anna was amazing. Like you should go to her. She'll do your emails. Right. And I have that now because I've given the value in whatever it is, like how to set up your business or where to go or who to talk to. A bit like you, right? Like you've got that network of people and you give it out because one day I think it will come back. One day it will come back in some shape or form.
I think that that's like such fabulous advice, because I think that serves people everywhere, really. I
Right.
think that's a bit of a go-to if you can see how, if you can alleviate someone's discomfort, even at the expense of your own, even for a short period of time. I think that, like, you're right, the impact that that can have on that individual is so big, as far as them sort of, especially when you can quite often catch some people in some pretty dark times too, and you just might happen to be that human. And that's nothing to do with, like, it's nothing to do with this being like an expat thing or someone that's moved. Like, that's just like a global human thing. And I think we don't actually do that enough.
No, I don't. I agree. I think there are some days when you're going to walk into someone's world and it's their darkest day and they can't get through it. And you gave them like the smallest crumb of something you could do because your life was going all right and it meant the biggest thing to them. And I just think if we all just gave a bit more and we were less, holding on to it all, I feel like the world would probably be a better place. Bit of a broad statement, but yeah.
It's interesting, but I just wanted to sort of circle back to a comment that you made around putting yourself out there and going into that room where you feel like you've just walked in on a completely awkward, really private conversation. I think to sort of round that out, I think that taking those, and they will happen, but then that not being the end of your turning up at a room with no one in its career. You got to go again. It's like falling off the horse. You got to get back on again. Very much so.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. So if you were to move again in the foreseeable future with more than 5 weeks turnaround, what would be some things that you would put in place or that you would do prior to going?
Question. Research where you're going, if you know, so you can find what you need. Like, I want a Pilates studio. My husband wants to have a decent gym. I want to make sure that there's activities for my kids. So they like rollerblading at the moment. Can they do that? Like, or is there tennis? Or can we get into some kind of sport and activity? Because we're very high energy. In news that will surprise no one. We're a very high energy family. So we need to be out there and doing stuff. So I like to research where we're going. And also from my point of view, like, it has to feel like an adventure for the children. So I usually put if I have more time, a bucket list of, hey, we're going to go here and these are the things we can do, right? And so it can be the smallest thing of, we're going to go to this mall and they've got this, whatever, like you move into Dubai, it's got like a snow dome in it, right? That's super exciting. Or, there's this island we can go to and we can drive to it. And so I try to find a few things that you can pick out, because from the kids' point of view, children are pretty narcissistic, right? Like, it's their world and their world only. So we have to kind of try and make it so that they're having an adventure. It might be hard from our point of view, and it's not so adventure-y sometimes, but we have to try and make it like an adventure. So I just think research where you're going. Also, someone that just moved again, we moved apartments last year. My best friend just moved last week, and she was like, oh God, good advice. And I was like, burn everything and just move with what you've got on your back, because I tell you're going to get so bored of packing that crap back up and then unpacking it. So minimize. What you need is very small, because actually when you move internationally, you often just move with suitcases, and then your shipping will come later, and often the shipping comes and you're like, oh my God, we have a lot of stuff. Like, do we need it? So really, really cleanse, and then cleanse again, and then cleanse again, because you don't need all of that. You don't need all those toys. You don't need all those books. Those clothes that you've been saving to go back into that corporate world, looking at me, you don't need them. You're not wearing them. I'm not going back into a corporate world from a dress from 2010. Like, if I'm going back into a corporate world, I'm going to go and buy something that's not 13 years old, right? So cleanse, so that you move with less. So then when you get there, you're not spending your life sorting stuff. You can go out into these awkward rooms and meet people.
Yeah, that's great. I think that That's actually such a good call as far as the holding on to the corporate things. Like it is actually a very good call. I'm just sort of thinking about some of the things that are sitting in my cupboard that like, oh, like if that happens.
Yeah, that. Oh, I've got winter stuff. Well, I have seen winter once in 16 years, and that was because my dad was dying in a hospital. This was not by choice, and I literally went to Zara and bought the biggest coat I could, and then a scarf, and then a pair of boots that are like 10 years old, and then the sole fell off as I was walking through the hospital, so I had to and I'm like 16 years out of date here with the fashion. Like, if you're going, just get rid, right? And I know it's not a culture I want to live in terms of environmental. Like, if we bought less, we wouldn't have to have so much. But I'm not going to wear my winter stuff that I wore when I was 23, 24. Like, that we've moved on. Fabrics have moved on. So we need to just get rid, right?
And just borrow them, especially if you live in the tropics. Borrowing other people's winter clothes is a very good life choice.
And also make sure you don't boots, because the humidity ruins all the glue, so the sole falls to pieces.
That was great advice that I have. I'm a boot girl. I've got lots of boots, and everyone that had lived along the equator had said to me, do not take your boots to Singapore. They will just disintegrate. Yeah. So that is great advice. I was just thinking about your kids' adventure concept. I think I really second that. And just a little tidbit that we did that was actually really effective was my husband just pulled up like Netflix on the TV and put Singapore into the search in Netflix. And we found some really interesting, so there was like some cooking shows and some other random sort of like tourist episodes of like, shows that had sort of gone in there. And one of them, because you'll appreciate this being in Singapore, was some sort of cooking show where they went to Black Tap. Have you been to Black Tap over in Marina Bay Sands?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm going to say then about? Yeah. So, okay, for those that have not had an experience of Black Tap, they make the most incredible milkshakes, like crazy. Like size of child's head extras stuck on the top, like fairy floss. And, there's like one that's got like a piece of New York style cheesecake that comes out on top of the, I'm talking like heart disease, diabetes, like 3 hours of sugar, like hell afterwards. But the girls watched this episode of Black Tap and them making the milkshakes and things, and they were just like, yeah, we'll move there, whatever. And we were like, okay, we're moving. And on the first weekend we get there, we're going to go to Black Tap and have milkshakes. And we did it. And they were like, done. We can live here.
Love it. That's great. That's a really good way. I hadn't thought about that. Like, you look on internet and you look on other places, but actually if you can watch a program about it, they can get excited about the place that they're going to be.
100%. So mine was 6 and 8 at the time. And so that really visual, low touch, something that they get, like the food was a really good idea. So for anyone listening that's thinking about doing this, that getting the kids to actually visually see, the food, like they went to like a hawker market. And so you got to see like, all the smoke coming off and lots of little shops, and they discovered what a Milo dinosaur was. So for those again who don't know a Milo dinosaur, oh my gosh, Anna, you don't know a Milo dinosaur? Well, a Milo dinosaur is literally Milo, and I don't know what they do. They just seem to like it's Milo. I assume they make it on milk. Maybe I shouldn't even say that. Maybe they make it on water. I don't know. But what they then pour is like scoops and scoops of Milo, like dry Milo on top of the Milo drink, and then hand it over to the kids. So my kids end up with it like literally all over them. But that is also
worse. But sure,
they're also a win. They also cost $1.20 or something crazy cheap like that. So it's a bribe after a big long bike ride for our family that we will swing into a hawker and get a Milo dinosaur.
Yeah, that sounds good. You've got to find a way to get your kids, I think, to engage and whatever it is that you're doing, especially 100%. If you're coming, because you came from like, rural into city, so that's a huge change. Like, we're very city people, so I think my kids are used to city, But yeah, I think you've got to get them on board.
Mine was like, okay, I've got to like adjust these kids to like traffic lights and wearing shoes.
Wearing shoes. My kids still don't wear shoes. I don't really wear shoes, but I know we have to.
Well, or wearing a swimming costume in the pool in our condo. Like, see, we have a pool at home that the swimming costumes were very regularly optional. So, if you had one piece of advice to give to yourself, what would it be as far as your first trailing spouse experience?
Start something sooner. To start something for yourself sooner, like even if it's not really monetized or it's a small monetized, like that. I think I look at people now who have like left their corporate job or whatever and they've started something on their own before they've had kids. Like if I had that hindsight, totally would have done it. So start something for yourself that you can choose how you dip in and out of it, and like just so that when you get somewhere, and this could just be me, that you're not just mum. Because don't get me wrong, like having kids took a long time and all the rest of it, and I'm very privileged to have children, and it was a hard journey. But just mum felt like, wow, I ran like $1 million programs, and now I'm sitting on the floor at a playgroup, and everyone talks to me like in wheels on the bus language. Like nobody knows. Whereas if you walk into a room and you're like, oh, actually, I run this thing on the side, you've got something else to connect with. So I would say try and start something for yourself sooner. And if you don't want to have a job or that's not a possibility, like carve out a piece of time somewhere in the week that is yours, because otherwise you just resent everybody that you've created and chosen to live with.
I.e. your family.
Yes, those people. Yes, those people that live in my house. Yes, because otherwise, like you're spending your whole life, you then become, you're doing kids stuff. It's all about the kids. Then you go, oh, your husband, and then you're the food, and then you're like, oh, I'm so tired. And at the end of the day, you're like, oh, I'll just go to bed and scroll on my phone. Right? This is not an activity. So I think it's really important to try and. That's what I should have done in Bangkok. I should have said, I'm going for a walk, or I'm going to do this more, and I didn't. And I kind of think that's what would have helped a bit better.
Oh, well, reflecting is always far easier than when you're in the moment.
Oh, yeah. No, that moment was thick and heavy. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Anna.
Thanks for having me.